Welcome to Blah Blah Time. This is the show where I literally ramble on and on about this, that, and everything in between. Looking at things from every possible angle, inside out and outside in. Lately, I've subscribed to Disney Plus, and I've been watching an absurd number of Disney movies at an unbelievable pace. The reason is actually pretty simple. I'd never really watched Disney movies before, and I'd always thought, I'll get around to them someday. Well, apparently that day finally came. The first one I watched was Snow White, and honestly, I need everyone to watch it. Or rather, I need everyone to listen to it. Snow White's vibrato is just unbelievably beautiful. Seriously, go listen to it. I've always had a hard time with stories that revolve around a man and a woman getting together. Not because I dislike them exactly, I just tend to lose interest. But Disney is different. I can keep watching and never get bored. And I think that's because the music is so wonderful. Personally, I especially love the music from the earlier films before Disney leaned so heavily into modern pop-style songwriting. There's something magical about those older scores. What surprised me the most was realizing that so many melodies I've heard throughout my life actually came from Disney movies. I'd hear a song and suddenly think, wait, this is where that came from. And that was such a fun discovery. Take So This Is Love from Cinderella, for example. Even if you're not in love, it somehow creates that feeling, that fluttering excitement, that strange sensation where your chest feels tight and warm at the same time. Like your heart is being gently squeezed. I can already tell. I'm not going to stop talking if I keep going. So let's end this topic here before I spiral into a full Disney lecture. We'll leave it there for now. Today we have a listener question that came in, so let's answer that. I always end up exhausted by emotional people. Even when I explain things logically, they don't understand, and they just reject what I'm saying based on their feelings. Even in conversations, when I point something out logically, they'll say things like, I just wanted you to empathize with me. So in the end, I find myself thinking that it's easier to be around people who are logical, like me. How can I get along better with emotional people? So here we go. We got this topic. Well, I don't actually think this is a problem about emotion versus logic. What I mean is, I don't think logic and emotion are what's colliding here. I think it's more like logic colliding with another logic. I mean, as you probably know, both sides usually have their own interpretation and their own internal reasoning, right? Even if one side explains their position in a logical and constructive way, if there are parts that don't feel convincing, or if something seems missing from the explanation, that's often the point where people start calling the other person emotional. For example, let's say you're working on something and you start getting hungry. Mike says, I'm in the zone right now, so I should eat later. And Bob says, no, that's emotional thinking. It would be more efficient to eat first and then continue working. Mike might be the kind of person who loses focus once he's eaten and feels satisfied, or maybe he's the type who knows that if he doesn't do it right now, he'll never do it. A now or never kind of person. Bob, meanwhile, might be worried that hunger itself becomes a distraction that interferes with his concentration and productivity. Both positions make sense, don't they? But people often call the unexplained part emotion. And what are those unexplained parts? Well, Mike's actual reasoning might be, focus is a scarce resource. Once I lose a flow state, it might never come back. The cost of being hungry is nothing compared to the cost of losing momentum. I'm a now or never type, so following the momentum is actually the most efficient thing I can do. And Bob's reasoning might be the brain needs energy. Hunger lowers cognitive performance. The distraction of being hungry interferes with my work. Solving the cost of hunger is more important than the cost of interrupting the task. That's what's really going on. In other words, it's not that one side has logic and the other doesn't. It's just that they're operating from different hypotheses. This isn't really a conflict between emotion and logic. It's a conflict between logic derived from premise A and logic derived from premise B. If all you can see is, wow, you're being emotional, that's basically where thinking stops. The point is to ask, why do you think that? What experiences led you to that conclusion? What are you worried about? Those are the questions we should be digging into. I sometimes wonder if people just like to label anything they don't understand as emotional or a momentary lapse in judgment. Take Shinjuku Station, for example. It's complete chaos, right? People are swarming around in every direction. But if you think about it, nobody is wandering around aimlessly. You might look at them and think, just walk in a straight line. But everyone is moving in a way that makes sense to them. Even if they later realize they took the wrong route, their actions made sense at that moment. Maybe they're trying to catch a train. Maybe they're avoiding a crowd. Maybe they're looking for a restroom. Maybe they're trying to find someone they're meeting. From the outside, though, it can look like they're following some bizarre, inefficient, completely irrational path. And isn't it when we don't understand the reason behind all that zigzagging that we call it emotion? So what I'm saying is this. Emotion is not the opposite of logic. What we often call emotion may simply be logic that is not yet visible from the outside. Or put differently, it's not a clash between emotion and logic. It's a clash between different forms of logic built upon different assumptions. In that sense, everyone is acting logically. Now, if I say that, it sounds like I'm saying conspiracy theorists are logical too, and in a way they are. What I'm trying to say is that being logical and being wrong are not mutually exclusive. Those two things can absolutely coexist. 1 + 1 = 2. Trying to force 1 or 3 to count as equally valid answers just makes things messy. So the real question isn't which side is more logical. The real question is, are we even solving the same problem? Because having an internally consistent line of reasoning and having a valid line of reasoning are two different things. People often use the words logic and consistency as if they mean the same thing. They don't. A system can be internally consistent and still be built on faulty assumptions. If the assumptions are wrong, the logic eventually collapses. So maybe the issue is that we haven't even established what page we're on. That's why we end up thinking that's just emotion. Because until we understand the logic underneath it, all we can do is describe it using a vague catch-all word like emotion. You know that phrase people often use? You put into words something I've always felt. I actually don't think that's what's happening. I don't think it's a case of I already understood it but couldn't express it. I think it's more like I didn't fully understand it until now, and suddenly I do. So what I'm really saying is maybe when we say we can't put something into words, it's simply because we don't fully understand it yet. Because language is thought. I don't know. The more I talk about this, the more I feel like I'm losing my mind. But honestly, whether something is emotion or logic is almost beside the point. Well, not completely beside the point, but when people bring up emotion versus logic, I don't think the real issue is the distinction itself. According to cognitive psychology, human beings often make judgments emotionally first and then construct reasons afterward. But that doesn't mean logic doesn't exist. People are still capable of creating coherent explanations even after the fact. In other words, emotion and logic aren't completely separate systems. Logic is often shaped and directed by emotion. That's apparently how it works. Actually, the listener says, emotional people don't understand me. But if we shift perspectives for a moment, what if you were the one who didn't understand them? That's also a possibility, isn't it? Whenever we feel that someone doesn't understand us, the reality is often that we don't understand them either. And even the premise, emotional people exhaust me, is worth questioning. Were they really emotional? Or were you simply operating from different assumptions? Or maybe they just hadn't found the words yet. Although I suppose if someone hasn't found the words yet, that means they don't fully understand it themselves either. And if that's the case, maybe that pre-verbal form of reasoning is what we call emotion. So perhaps emotion is simply logic before it has learned how to speak. That said, I do think there's value in the attempt to distinguish between emotion and logic. The reason people bring up emotion versus logic is often because they're trying to justify one side over the other. What I mean is, the question, is this emotional or logical, is very often really a question of which one deserves legitimacy. But in reality, human beings can't completely remove emotion from their decision making. And logic is always operating on top of some underlying value system or goal. Logic doesn't appear out of nowhere. It starts with a value judgment. What matters to you? What are you optimizing for? The listener says, I only want to be around logical people. But that raises another question. What exactly is a logical person? A while ago, a friend and I got into a discussion about whether it's possible to develop romantic feelings for someone you've been friends with for years. I was on the yes side. My friend insisted it was impossible, and the argument just went on forever. Eventually, we started digging into each other's assumptions, and somehow the conversation ended up becoming a discussion about what the word friend even means. As we kept talking, we realized that my friend only becomes deeply close to people they feel no sexual attraction toward. In other words, for them, whether someone is a romantic possibility is decided almost immediately. Meanwhile, I'm perfectly capable of becoming close friends with someone I find sexually attractive, without viewing them through a romantic lens. Romantic feelings might appear later, or they might not. Once we figured that out, we both went, oh, well, no wonder we weren't getting anywhere. And suddenly, the disagreement made perfect sense. The discussion was resolved because we uncovered the assumptions underneath it. Now, just to be clear, this is not the moment for me to start talking about whether sexual attraction and romantic attraction are necessarily connected. That conversation would require about 6 hours, so yeah, maybe not today. Anyway, getting back to the point, if I had to define a logical person today, I don't think it's someone who always arrives at the correct conclusion. I think it's someone who is capable of examining both their own assumptions and other people's assumptions. Because in the example I just gave, both of us were correct from the standpoint of our own experiences. Both of us were being logical. The difference was that we were operating from different premises. So the real question becomes, what does the world look like from your perspective? And then both people try to explore that together. The thing is, that takes a tremendous amount of patience. I've argued with people online before. And honestly, it's incredibly difficult when you can't see the other person's face. Everything becomes harder. The conversation with my friend happened while we were on a road trip, and we got surprisingly passionate about it. Honestly, we were probably taking it way too seriously for two people on vacation. But because we trusted each other, because neither of us thought the other person was bad or stupid just because we disagreed, we were both willing to keep moving toward each other instead of away from each other. Eventually, we arrived at the inn, paused the discussion, ate dinner, soaked in the hot springs, drank sake, and enjoyed the evening. Then the debate resumed the next day on the drive home. It was that we were looking at the world through fundamentally different lenses. And once we saw that, we both just laughed and went, oh, so that's it. We're different. And honestly, learning that someone can experience the world in a way that had never occurred to you before, that's fascinating. If a conversation like that takes so much energy, even face-to-face, then expecting the same thing to happen between anonymous strangers on social media is probably unrealistic. Oh, a summary! Right. Okay, let's see. I think the conclusion of this whole discussion, it's actually pretty simple. Maybe most conflicts aren't really logic versus emotion at all. Maybe they're visible logic versus logic we haven't seen yet. And yes, I'm going to use the Shinjuku Station example. Again, everyone in Shinjuku Station is moving for some reason. From the outside, it just looks like people are wandering around aimlessly, but when we don't know the reason behind their movements, we call it emotion. In reality, though, emotion may not be the opposite of logic at all. It may simply be the name we give to a decision-making process that hasn't been fully explained yet. When someone appears emotional, it may not be because they lack logic. It may be because there are assumptions, experiences, or perspectives that we simply can't see. So what's important here isn't deciding who is more logical. It's trying to understand why that person came to that conclusion in the first place. And if there really is such a thing as a logical person, I don't think it's someone who lacks emotions. I think it's someone who can make their emotions, assumptions, and reasoning processes as visible as possible, and who can also consider the possibility that they might be wrong. Someone who doesn't become attached to the idea that I'm the logical one. Someone who is aware that their emotions influence their judgments. Someone who can observe their own emotions. Someone who tries to understand their emotions. Someone who tries to put those emotions into words. In fact, I think a genuinely logical person is someone who doesn't particularly need the identity of being a logical person at all. Someone who can recognize the influence of their own assumptions and emotions, and who is willing to examine those influences together with other people, even when that examination might reveal they're mistaken. So, I guess that's my answer. What do you think? As always, I'd love to hear your questions and comments. Oh, and I still have to record the next episode of Blah Blah Time podcast after this. But now I'm hungry. Should I eat first? Or should I record first? Which choice is more logical? You know what? At this point, I really don't care. My concentration is falling apart, so I'm just gonna go grab something to eat. Thank you so much for listening today. I hope you all have a wonderful day. See you next time.